So how sure can we be that the Bible's true? How sure can we be that Jesus really is who he said he was, or said he is? And Peter, in his second letter, chapter 1, makes a strange remark. He says, "For we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitness of his majesty." Now, first of all, Peter's identifying himself as one of the few that was an eyewitness of his majesty. He's alluding, of course, to Matthew 17, the Transfiguration. He was one of 3 guys that were there. So many of us probably think, boy, I would have given anything to have been there and seen it. But he's going to go on and make a point. Even though we were eyewitnesses of his majesties, he says, we also have a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well to take heed, as a light shineth into a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. There's a strange phrase here Peter uses, the more sure word of prophecy. He's saying that you and I have something that is more definitive, more provable than had you been an eyewitness. Well, that's kind of a wild statement. What do you suppose he meant? Well, let's take a look at this. You know, Lord Kelvin, commonly known as William Thompson, Nobel Prize winner and so forth, he says, until we can measure a thing, we really know very little about it. So we're going to set about to measure this if we can. And the Old Testament, the Tanakh, was translated into Greek 270 BC. This is a hard date that you can confirm in any competent encyclopedia. The Jews in those days spoke Greek, not Hebrew, because that was the language throughout the world after Alexander the Great enforced it. So if you were Jewish and raised in a Jewish home, you might know some Hebrew in the same way that today Catholics know Latin. You use it for ceremonial purposes, but it wasn't your operative language. So the Jews desired to have their scriptures in a language they could relate to, which was Greek. So under Ptolemy Philadelphus, in Alexandria, one of the main literary capitals in that era, funded the translation of the Hebrew scriptures from Hebrew into Greek. They got 70 of the best scholars, spent 15 years doing it, and the work product is available to us today. It's known as the Septuagint version of the Old Testament. Septuagint being a fancy word for 70. Some say 72, but let's let that go. Now, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, contains over 300 specific prophecies detailing the coming of the Messiah. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to go through in careful detail each one of those 300. Except Ron said that might take a little too long. He doesn't have that much videotape, so we're going to cut this down. We're going to go do this simply. Now, by the way, these prophecies are quoted all through the Scripture, but just the ones quoted in the Gospels include that he was to be of David's family. That's all through there. He'd be born of a virgin. He'd be born in Bethlehem. He'd sojourn in Egypt. He'd live in Galilee, in fact, in Nazareth. That he'd be announced like an Elijah, like Herod. All these things are prophesied in the Old Testament in detail. That this would occasion the massacre of Bethlehem's children, that would proclaim a jubilee to the world. His mission would include the Gentiles, and his ministry would be one of healing. He would teach through parables. He would be disbelieved, rejected by the rulers. That's all in there in Psalm 69, 118, in 3 different places in Isaiah. In fact, it goes on that he would make a triumphal entry in Jerusalem. He would be betrayed by a friend for 30 pieces of silver. He'd be smitten, and his people would be scattered. He'd be given vinegar and gall. They would cast lots for his garments. His side would be pierced. Not a bone would be broken. He would die among the malefactors. Yes, the Messiah would die. That's recorded not only in Isaiah 53, but also in Daniel 9 and elsewhere. His dying words were foretold. In fact, Psalm 22 reads like it was dictated first person singular as he hung on the cross. He would be buried by a rich man. He would rise from the dead on the 3rd day. Resurrection would be followed by the destruction of Jerusalem. So these Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek 3 centuries before Christ. They concern over 300 of the things I've just summarized. What you and I are going to do this morning is we're going to examine just 8 of them as a sample. We're going to take the easiest 8 we can find. Let's take number 1. In Micah 5:2, you're all familiar with this, but thou Bethlehem Ephrathah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting. Now, we could spend a whole conference on this verse, because there's so much here. Most churches in the world have no concept that God is calling him to be a ruler in Israel. He promised Mary that he'd sit on the throne of David. That did not exist in those days. He has yet to do that, and yet many churches deny that he ever will. But let's get on. and this is the birthplace of the pre-existent one who's going forth from old from everlasting. But all we're going to extract for this purpose is where was he born? Born in Bethlehem. How many of you have met somebody born in Bethlehem? I suppose in one sense all your hands should be up. Okay. If we go to the planet Earth and we zero into the Middle East, go into Israel, and we zero into Jerusalem, a little to the south, there is a place called Bethlehem, and you zero into that, you'll discover that it's a town that throughout history has had a population of something less than 7,000 people. That's why probably you have not met somebody from Bethlehem. They're certainly not born there, because that's pretty remote. Now the question is, what we want to explore, we want an estimate, what is the probability that any person in the world, taken at random, was born in Bethlehem? Well, that's something we can bound. We don't know the exact number, but we can make an estimate here. If the population of Bethlehem was never more than 7,000, let's round it off and say 10,000. And let's assume at any one point in time in the history of the world there's never more than 1 billion people on the planet Earth overall, then probably there's something like 10 to the 4th divided by 10 to the 9th, or roughly 1 chance in 10 to the 5th, or 1 chance in 100,000 of you meeting someone from Bethlehem. It's probably much more rare than that, but that's a conservative guess. You follow me so far? Okay, let's take another one. Number 2. In Zechariah 9, verse 9, there's a verse that says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king," that's a key word, "thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass." And so this is what Jesus deliberately fulfilled in Luke 19. The real question is, how many people throughout history have presented themselves as a king to Jerusalem riding a donkey? Well, I don't know of any. But that's not a hard thing to do, probably. So if I told you that I'm going to estimate the chances of someone doing this is less than 1 in 100, am I being generous? You could say 1 in a million, probably justify it, but I'm going to say 1 in 100 to be conservative. You'll see why I can do that in a minute. Let's take a third one. In Zechariah, he's fun of these. He's got a number of these that are kind of fun. He says, "And I said unto them, if you think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear." So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. That familiar to you? We all know someone that was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. The question is, how many people in the history of the world have been betrayed for 30 pieces of silver? Well, I know of none, but I'm sure there probably is some. If I said there's a chance of less than 1 in 1,000, am I being conservative? It's obviously much more rare than that, but that'll service us for our purpose in a minute. Let's take number 4. The Lord said unto me, "Cast it unto the potter." This is the next verse, but it's a separate issue. "Cast it unto the potter. A goodly price that I was prized out of them, and I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord." Well, this gets kind of interesting. I think most of us recognize when this was fulfilled. Remember Judas, when he had betrayed him, he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned in that I have betrayed innocent blood." I think this is interesting because Satan had entered Judas, so we have Satan himself declaring Christ's innocence. I think that's useful, but let's go on. And the priest said, "What's that to us? You see to that." And so Judas cast them down on the floor of the temple and departed and went out and hanged himself. Okay, now they have a problem. The chief priest took the 30 pieces of silver, said it's not lawful for to put them into the treasury because of the price of blood. See, there's a rule against that. This was blood money. It was illegal to add that to the treasury. But these priests had good accountants, okay, and they knew the law. They took counsel and brought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. See, they couldn't put the money in the treasury, but they could prepay anticipated expenses. And it was a duty of the temple to take care of foreigners if they died in the temple precincts. So they had and there were some every year that did this. They had to deal with the funeral and the burial and so forth. And so it turned out there was a cheap piece of ground being sold by some potter, so they used the money to buy the potter so they'd have a place to bury strangers. So they anticipated expenses this. And that's why this field is called, apparently, the field of blood unto this day. Now, the point is, the real question I have here is, okay, get the ingredients here. The price is 30 pieces of silver. The location of the transaction is in the house of the Lord, that is the temple. And who ends up with the money? The potter. This is all anticipated by this remark in Zechariah 12, or Zechariah 11:13. I'm going to say 1 in 100,000, I'm being generous. I could say 1 in a million, be safe and justified. I'll say 100,000 just to be safe. Let's go on. Number 5. I love this one personally because it really threw me when I was a teenager. I ran across this, Zechariah 13:6. It says, "And one shall say, and what are these wounds in thy hands? And he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends." And I thought, wow, here's another one of these I used to collect those, the Old Testament prophecies, so I'd make a little card and write the verse and put the reference on the back and add it to a group that I'd carry with me to try to memorize. But as I tried to memorize this, I kept stumbling. It didn't make sense. The more I read it, the less sense it made. What are these wounds in thy hands? Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Somehow I could not visualize a bunch of Roman soldiers driving spikes through his wrists into these 20 by 20s or whatever the timbers were, as being in the house of his friends. That just didn't compute. But then it finally dawned on me what this is really talking about. Remember that first night after the Emmaus Road, they gathered behind the closed doors, and the Lord appeared to them and so forth. And Thomas wasn't with them. And they said, boy, you should have been at the prayer meeting last night. Guess who showed up? Thomas said, except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand in his side, I will not believe. And of course, 8 days later, they're all together again. This time Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, stood in the midst, and peace be unto you. And then he said to Thomas, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but be believing. And Thomas said, oh, my Lord and my God. I always visualize him falling to his knees when he said that. In any case, Jesus says, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet believed. Now I go back to Zechariah 13:6, and I understand what he said. See, it wasn't the nails that wounded Christ. It was Thomas's unbelief. How many people taken at random have been wounded in their hands in the house of his friends? I'm going to say 1 in 1,000. I'm being generous. Let's move on. Number 6. In Isaiah 50, we have to get a couple out of Isaiah 53 and one out of Psalm 22, and we'll be done. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, as he is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as the sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. Okay. How many prisoners accused of a capital crime make no defense even though they're innocent? There probably have been some, not many. But if I say 1 in 1,000, am I being secure here? I think so. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Okay, how many people died among the wicked and yet were buried with the rich that were not attorneys? I'm being a little flippant here, okay. No, seriously, how many have died among the wicked and yet were buried with? I'm again say 1 in 1,000, I'm being generous. Another one here, the last one. In Psalm 22, we have to take one of them out. There's so many things in Psalm 22, we'll just grab one here. For the dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. And now this was interesting because this was written 700 years before crucifixion was invented. The official form of capital punishment in Israel was stoning, not crucifixion. But yet the crucifixion is so vividly described in Psalm 22 that there have been articles in the American Medical Journal analyzing the cause of death through that. In any case, this is what David penned, this under inspiration of the Holy Spirit. How many people taken at random have died having their hands and feet pierced? Obviously, there's many people that have, but if I say 1 in 10,000 in the history of the world, I think I'm being generous. Okay, so what have we done here? We picked 8 prophecies: born in Bethlehem, king on a donkey, 30 pieces of silver, temple pot and all that, wounds in hands, no defense, innocent, died with the wicked, crucified. But now we've got a problem. The real question I have, okay, we've got the probability, at least an estimate, of 8 different conditions. Our challenge now is to say, okay, what's the probability that one person fulfilled all 8 of these? Well, that's an exercise in composite probabilities. Bear with me as I try to demonstrate what we need to do here. Let's assume in this room we have just 100 people to make the arithmetic simple. And let's assume that 60% of you are men and 40% of you are women. What is the probability that if I was blindfolded and somehow mingled among you, so I had a random chance of touching anyone, and I touched someone on the shoulder, what's the probability that I touched a female? Well, we take it's the probability of the ratio here. It's 40%. There's 60 men, 40 women, and assuming this is randomly distributed, if I touch one of them, the probability is 40%, or putting it more properly, a probability of 0.4, 4/10. Okay? That's pretty straightforward. Let's take a different thing. Let's assume I have a population here of 100 people. 60% are right-handed and 40% are left-handed. What is the probability that I pick someone at random and they are left-handed? Again, it would be 40% or 0.4. No problem. Here's what I'm getting at. Let's assume I have the same population. Let's assume these attributes are randomly distributed. What is the probability of my selecting a left-handed female? Well, I take that one distribution, which is 40% left-handed, and I take the other distribution, which is 40% female, and when I put those two together, It's the ones that meet those two conditions that I'm dealing with, and it's 0.4 times 0.4, 0.16. In other words, 16 out of 100, approximately, would be left-handed females. Are you with me so far? Okay. The whole idea is if I'm looking for composite probabilities, I just multiply the probabilities. And so I take 0.4 times 0.4, which is 0.16, and that would be the combination. Okay, well now let's get back to these 8. What I need to do is multiply them. Okay. Well, I've used powers of 10 to make it simple because all I have to do is count the zeros. So if these probabilities are, reasonable estimates, then the chance of one person fulfilling all 8 is 10 with 28 zeros after it. Except I've got to redivide that by the total number of people I'm dealing with. And let's assume I'm going to use something like 100 billion as a total population base. And so I take the 10 to the 28th divided by 10 to the 11th. So that the probability that one person taken at random could fulfill all 8 is 1 chance in 10 with 17 zeros after it. Now, it turns out that that is a rather large number. If I had a statistics class here and I was going to try to get across to you the concept of 1 chance in 100, one way to demonstrate that is to get a large urn, fill it with 100 silver dollars, and take one of them and mark it with, say, a lipstick or nail polish, what have you. Put the 99 regular ones and one marked, and I shake them all up, and reaching down in there, assuming I set this up so it's a random, any one of them could have been picked, the chance that I pick the 1 in 100 is, that the chance that I got the one that was marked is 1 in 100. You get the model. That's a typical way of demonstrating the concept, what we mean by odds of 1 in 100. Well, what I need to do here is I need a container that has 10 to the 17th silver dollars. Okay? Now, it turns out that's a lot of silver dollars. I need a bucket big enough to hold 10 to the 7th silver dollars. Well, I'm going to take the state of Texas, and if I fill it 2 feet deep, that it will contain about 10 to the 17th silver dollars. Now, I mark one of them, and I mix them all up so that it has an equal chance of being anywhere. And we'll send Ron Madsen into Texas, blindfolded. We'll let him wander around so he has an equal chance of being anywhere. And he reaches down, and the chance that he picked up the one we marked is 1 chance in 10 to the 17th. You get a feeling for 10 to the 17th? Another way to look at 10 to the 17th, by the way, that's the number of seconds. If you accept a 15 billion year lifetime of the universe, that's how many seconds are in the universe. It shocks many scientists. I was on board with Dr. Teller and his sidekick Norris Keeler, and they were talking about 10 to the 17th. I mentioned, that's as many seconds in the universe. And they looked at me shocked. Says, do the math. It's funny, we use these numbers without realizing how large they really are. Let's do this another time. Instead of 8, I have 300 to choose from. Let me take another 8. Now I've got 300 to choose from. The next 8 that I would pick are likely to be more specific than the ones I've mentioned so far. And I don't want to go through all that again. To make it simple, let's just assume that they are no more specific. They're not less likely than the first 8. Let's use the same distribution. Let's assume they're just as easy as the first 8. So, assuming no decrease in likelihoods, I now have 10 to the 28th times 10 to the 28th. I divide that by my 10th to 11th population. So now I need a bucket that has 10 to the 45th silver dollars. That's the chance of one person fulfilling 16 of these prophecies. Okay. Well, I need a bucket that I take the earth, and I make a bucket that is 30 times the distance from the earth to the sun. And that would give me 10 to the 45th silver dollars. Now we mix them all up, we mark one of them, shuffle them up. This time I put Ron Madsen in a spacesuit, and I send him out there, and he reaches out in such a way that he has an equal chance of getting any one of them. He gets one of them, and the chance that he got the one we marked is 1 chance in 10 to the 45th. Well, I want to do this one more time, and I'm not going to double this time, I'll triple just to reach a little further. I'm going to take 48 prophecies. I have 300 to deal with, so I'm taking less than 1/6 there, and I'm also going to make another assumption that's ridiculous. I'm going to assume no decrease in likelihoods. It turns out by reaching into some of these prophecies, they're so technical that they stand alone on their own feet, and I'll show you one before we're through, that is more rare than all this put together, but let's just stick with this for now. So now I have, I've tripled, and now I'm tripling again. So I got 10 to the 28th times 10 to the 28th times 10 to the 28th times 10. So I get 10 to the 168th. I divide that by the 10 to the 11th population, so I now have 10 to the 157th power. Now, silver dollars won't work for this one because it's too big. So I'm going to make a ball of these things, not silver dollars, they're too big. The smallest thing you can imagine, what would that be? An atom, okay. I'll make a ball of every atom in our galaxy. That turns out to be about 10 to the 66th, believe it or not. Well, I'm a long way from 10 to the 157th, so I'm going to make such a ball for every atom in the universe. So now I got 10 to the 66th, I'm 10 to the 66th, I'm up 10 to the 132nd. I'm still a long way. Well, I'm going to do that silly exercise. Every second since the universe began, I'll use for this purpose an estimate of 15 billion years. Well, that's 10 to the 17 seconds, and that's 10 to the 149th. And I have to imagine this whole thing, and I'm still fall short. I'm still short by 100 million times. Now you get the idea how absurd this is. And we've dealt with only 48 of the 300 prophecies. What am I getting at here? I've got a long way around the barn, perhaps, to make this point. I am more certain that Jesus Christ is the Messiah of Israel than I am of any other fact in the universe, including my own name. And this is the reason.